Nako, marami yung kinakabahan dyan sa Malacanang pagka nakikita nila itong larawan na to ni Stella Quimbo. Dati hong tauhan yan itong si Saldico. Kaya alam ho niya lahat ng kababalaghan na nangyari dyan sa 23, 24 at 2025 budget. Marami na hong nagpapanik ngayong mga panahon na to. Susunod na ba itong si Stella Quimbo? Dito sa video na to mga kababayan, sabay-sabay ho nating ipanalangin na sana ay mapagbigyan ang interim release na yan itong si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. Nakita lang ho natin itong si Conti ang utak. Anak ng Petrang Garapata. Unahin na ho natin to. Wala nang intro-intro. Kung bago lang ho kayo sa ph.update, sang like at sang subscribe. Masaya na ho tayo dyan at sa mga gusto sumali sa ating community, yung join button nandyan lang ho sa baba. Ito na ho ang isa sa pinaka magiging masayang Pasko natin kung sakaling makalabas itong si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. Mapagbigyan ng kanyang interim release. Kasi base ho, dito sa statement na nakita natin, dito kay Conti ang utak. Ito ho meron hong pahiwatig. Parang ramdam na ho ata nila na itong si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte makakalaya na. Magkaka-interim release na. Kasi maaangas to mga to Kung sila lang ho masusunod, yung pagmumukha lang ho na yan ang masusunod, hindi ho nila hahayaang makawala itong si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. Ganyan ho kawalang niya yung mga ano na yan, yung mga makakaliwa. Yung mga makakaliwang grupo na yan, nakagaya nitong si, nitong si Christina Conti. Ano ba sabi niya? Ito mga kababayan, ito mga punto de vista nitong si Atty. Conti ang utak. Diyan sa napipintong interim release nitong si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, meron ho tayong nasisense. Yung tipong parang yung Pasko ng mga DDS, mga taga-suporta ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, mga kababayan natin dyan sa Davao, talagang magiging Merry Christmas. Ang wala lang ho talagang Merry Christmas yung mga taga-Malacanang. Kasi nasasanghuto sila sa samot-saring mga skandalo ngayong mga panahon na to. Ito, kung aproban iyan, kanilang aaproban ay isang set of condition at parameters of interim release. Naku, parang ramdam mo na rin ba, Atty. Conti, na mag-grant ang interim release nitong si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte? Ramdam nyo na ba kayo dyan sa Kamatayang Black? Hindi magwawagi ang kasamaan sa kabutihan, tandaan mo yan. Ito, nandyan ang kung sino ang pwedeng makausap, both phone calls and actual visitors. Limitado ang kanyang paggalaw. Saan siya pwedeng makapunta at iba pa. Kailangan istrikto yon. Host country doon sa masasabing kondisyon ng kanyang pagstay. Anong problema dyan? Basta mabigyan ng interim release sa lalong madaling panahon ito si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. No problem. Anong problema yan? Malinaw rito na ang kanyang interim release ay hindi bastang paglaya. Kailangan kung anong restriction na halos katulad sa ICC, ganun din. Kasi hindi pa rin pwede na parang malayang-malaya siya anak ng toka, interim release nga. Wala na siya sa pangangalaga ng ICC. Interim release, yung normal na yung buhay niya, yun nga lang, kung ang condition, kung anong oras siya gusto ipatawag ng ICC, dapat dadalo siya. Hindi niya pwedeng intimidate yung mga witness ko nitong si Trililing. Diba? Pero yung hindi magiging malaya yung paggalaw niya, napakalaking kalokohan noon. Interim release. Release. Ang bira naman tong si Atty. Conti. Ano lang, pampalubag loob lang ho nila yan mga kababayan. Pero tayo dito, tiwala, ramdam na ho natin mga kababayan na itong si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, sabay-sabay ho tayong manalangin na mapagbigyan niya ng Court of Appeal ng ICC ang interim release ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. Kasi mga kababayan, nawalan jurisdiction, di ba? Yung hindi dumaan sa tamang proseso, anak ng towa, yung mga kasama ni Tatay Digong sa paghatid sa kanya dyan, wala pong mga tsinelas Di po minadali talaga. Di ba? Ayan na nga sinasabi natin, ano po meron tayo dito Nako, ba't bumalagayan? Ang tagal na ho nito Sa bawat anak nitong si Lisa Araneta Marcos, meron hong kamukha sa kanyang mga ninong. Kamukha nun yung kanilang mga ninong. Halimbawa, itong ang pangalan to, itong isa na to, itong katapat ni Lagdameo, kamukha niyang isang anak na itong si Lisa. Ito naman medyo chubby-chubby, kamukha niya itong si Martin Romualdez. Yung si Bong Dasa, kamukha niya naman itong si Sandro Marcos. Ba't walang kamukha si Bongbong Marcos? Ba't puro mga ninong kamukha? Ba't kamukha ni pare? Ano ba? Walang problema. Ako nga, kamukha ko si Tatay Digong eh. Hindi naman nagre-reklamo yung tatay ko. Okay lang sa kanya. Pero ito, matindi to ha. Walang kamukha si Marcos Jr. sa mga anak mo. Matindi talaga itong si Bong Dasa at itong si Charis. Di ba? Magkamukha sila. Ito mga kababayan, pagpapanggap ni Marcos Jr. na malapit siya sa mga bata, hindi siya malapit mga kababayan. Kung sakaling makita niyong pakamay-kamay yung walang yan, hindi totoo yan. Napakalaking kabalintunahan ho niyan mga kababayan. Huwag kayo maniwala ha. Tignan niyo naman ho, nabibingi siya. Kala, asan yung pulburon ko? Ilabas niyo na ha, sisingutin ko na yan. Nangangati ho ilong natin. Pagka ganitong mga sinyales, merong darating na good news eh. Parang ramdam na ho talaga natin si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte mapagbibig na yan. Inaya niya na ang kanyang interim release na yan. Kasi yan ho ang nararapat. Diba? Si dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, ginawa niya lang ang kanyang obligasyon bilang presidente. Kung merong nasaktan, so be it, kailangan hong mangyari ang mga dapat mangyari. Diba? Oh. Ano po bang meron tayo dito? Hayun na nga, anak ng Petrang Garapata. Ito talagang si Marcos Jr. Panibagong kabalbalan na naman ho niya ito mga kababayan. Ano ba itong dinadaldal na to ni Bello? Isa ho ito sa mga kaalyado ni dating Pangulo. Tapat yan si Bello. Ito. Oh, ito. Yan ho, di si former Labor Secretary Sylvester Bello III. Ang sabi niya, sabi ko, pasensya na po. Unang-una, kung tatanggapin ko po ang 1 billion pesos, saan ko ilalagay? Wala naman akong maraming malita. PBBM offers 1 billion for Bello. Former Department of Labor and Employment Dole Secretary Sylvester Bello III has claimed that President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. offered him 1 billion pesos to run against Davao City Rep Isidro Ungab, an ally of former President Rodrigo Duterte in 2025 congressional race. Ano nagtawa? Pati mga matitinong kaalyado ni Tatay Digong pinipirata nyo. Kasi nasabi ko sa iyo, Marcos Jr., sabi kasi ng ate mo, adik ka eh. Ayaw mo pa kasi magpa-hair follicle test. Yan tuloy, tinatawag ka ng adik sa social media. Di umano adik siya, sabi ng kanyang kapatid. Sabi nitong si adik, 1 billion pesos daw para halabanan niya itong si Congressman Isidro Ungab. Bangag talaga. Yan ang sinasabi ko sa iyo, Marcos Jr. Hindi lahat nabibili ng pera. Yung loyalty, yun ang wala ka sa mga tauhan mo ngayon. Si Tatay Digong nasa dahig na, loyal pa rin yung mga iniwan niya. Loyal pa rin yung mga vlogger niya. Loyal pa rin yung mga taga-suporta niya. Ikaw pagka wala ka ng mali-malitang pera, anong meron ka? Yung mga vlogger mo, sila magsasagpangan kasi magkakainggitan na ang mga yang. Uy, mas malaki nakukuha mo. Anak na daw ko, hindi nakaabot sa akin yung binigay sa akin. Yun na, dyan na mag-uumpisa ang kanilang mga away-away. Ngayon, hindi pa kasi bumabaha pa ng pera. Pero darating ang punto, Marcos Jr., kailangan mong harapin ang katotohanan. Baka sabihin, walang resibo yung na yan. Ito, pakinggan natin. Ito si Sylvester Bello III, dating Dole Secretary nung panahon ni dating Pangulo Rodrigo Duterte. Game.
Kung gaano ka kaswapang ng mga tao doon.
Yan.
Insatiable, walang
Walang kabusugan, no?
Hindi na natuwa sa 1 million, hindi na natuwa
Grabe,
sa
no?
10 million, billions na.
Grabe naman.
Oh, I was offered also something like that to run in Davao.
Nako.
Hindi panahon na darating ako dyan.
Yan.
I was offered to run in Davao. I was offered billion din.
Grabe naman yan. Narinig mo ba yan, Marcos Jr.? Yan ang wala ka. Ang meron ka lang, siguro ngayon, mali-malit ang pera. Laki ng salin mo eh. Daming pera. Pagka linagay mo sa maleta niyan, ang dami niyan, di ba? At yun lang ang meron ka ngayon. Mali-malit ang pera. Maliban doon, loyalty, tunay na taga-suporta, tunay na pagmamahal ng sambay ng Pilipino. Wala ka niyan. Pero si Tatay Digong, nasa The Hague, Netherlands, nandito pa rin yang si Sylvester Berrio. Nandito pa rin ang mga DDS. Nandito pa rin ang sambay ng Pilipino na na-appreciate yung ginawa niyang pagmamahal sa bawat isang Pilipino nung siya pa ang nasa Malacanang. Yan ang wala ka. Di ba? Palakpakan natin si dati Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte at itong si Secretary Sylvester Berrio.
Nung hindi ako tumakbo, tinanggal ako sa trabaho. Because I was offered to run. Hindi ko na lang sabihin. May panahon para I will go into the details of
Eto na galing Balita PH ito. Ayan na yun eh.
offer. 1 billion.
Meron kayong aabangan sa susunod na kapihan.
Alam natin kung bakit yung mga iba doon tumakbo against the president. Wow, alam natin.
Ibig sabihin yung si Nograles tumakbo yun, baka 1 billion din in-offer sa kanya. Kahit alam nilang talo sila, tumakbo pa rin. Ika nga, sinugal na nila. O baka mali-maliit ang pera ka. 1 billion, takbo ka kung bahala. Ponduan natin yan, 1 billion.
Kaya na lang siya lang mag-explain later. So, ayun po. Ang appeal ko sa inyo mga kasamahan ko sa PDP at sa lahat ng bawat Pilipino, let us be vigilant. At saka huwag lang tayo ma-satisfy sa bunganga. Let's do something. Gagawa tayo ng paraan. Gagawa tayo ng paraan. Para sa gano'n ay medyo naman sila, masyado na silang garapal. Wala nang parang natural na sa kanila magnakaw eh. I don't know kung gaano ka kaswapang ng mga tao doon.
Ayun na nga mga kababayan, sibalik ko na to kay Stella Quimbo para marami ng kabahan dyan sa Malacanang ha. Kung nalalaman lang ho mga kababayan, maraming nalalaman yan si Stella Quimbo. Ikaw ba naman magiging vice chairperson kayo ng appropriation committee, diba? Kung ito na, pakinggan natin ano ba sasabihin niya dito. Masyadong kabato. Yan.
Hello po.
Nako.
Magandang gabi.
Kumusta naman daw? Long time Namiss ko na yung artista band mo. Yung mga Rolex mo, yung mga Hermes mo, nasa na? Nangiya ka
Galing lang po akong Congress. Medyo pagod na.
Nako.
Pero ito po, kailangan ko pa pong gumawa ng video dahil
Mahirap talaga, anak na to. Alam ko ano to, lamang video lang to eh. Kung talaga Stella, binakaba mo naman yung mga taga Malacanang. Anak na, napagod do yung alin na yan kasi pagdating dun sa mga insertion, yung pinapagawa ni Marcos Jr., medyo mahirap-hirap. Ito na, dito na tayo kay Senator Dante Marcoleta. Hindi ko nakapalag itong si Gibo sa mga tanong nitong si Senator Marcoleta. Budget deliberation sa plenaryo ngayon ng ang tag dito. DND, AFP. Ano ba dito? Proposed 2026 budget of the Department of National Defense. So tama, DND ho tayo ngayong araw. Game!
In order to fulfill a very important social obligation today. Mr. President, I'd like to start with defense alliances with the United States, Japan, and Australia. The first question is, to what extent does the 2026 budget assume U.S., Japanese, or Australian support in case of a major WPS contingency?
Well, Mr. President, there's no particular item for the U.S., Japan, and Australian arrangement. It forms part under the visiting forces arrangement, Mr. President. And the exercises being conducted is subsumed under the operational budgets of the different agencies, Mr. President. So there's no particular item for the U.S., for Japan, for Australia. It's subsumed under the exercises being conducted and subsumed under those budgets, Mr. President.
And that will mean, Mr. President, that no critical capabilities are still being outsourced from these allies.
Mr. President, the arrangement between our allies is focused on different aspects, no? Intelligence sharing, cybersecurity partnerships, as well as interoperability arrangements. We also purchase a large amount of our modernization from our allies, particularly Korea and the United States.
But, Mr. President, if we consider the Mutual Defense Treaty between the United States and the Philippines, a treaty which was signed in 1951, I don't think the United States is accomplishing its obligation under the treaty, more particularly Article 2. May I cite that particular provision, Mr. President? Article 2 of the Mutual Defense Treaty says that in order to more effectively achieve the objectives of this treaty, parties, meaning the U.S. and the Philippines, separately and jointly by self-help or mutual aid, will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. Can we say, Mr. President, that at present the Philippines is capable of resisting armed attack?
The answer from the Department of National Defense depends on the degree of the armed attack, Mr. President. And that's why we have interoperability exercises with our allies, Mr. President, so that we can be prepared for any eventuality, including disaster preparedness, Mr. President, which is, I think, a much more critical preparedness activity that we need to endeavor.
The treaty, Mr. President, did not distinguish the nature and kind of armed attack. It just said both parties should be capacitated to repel armed attack. So the question is our country in a position to repel armed attack? Let's say from Vietnam.
Well, it really depends, Mr. President, on the degree of the armed attack, Mr. President. So
They should consider the strength of the Vietnamese army. Can we just... we cannot imagine how much force or what is the extent of armed attack. These countries who may want to attack us will not tell us. Kaya nga, paano natin magagamit yung Article 2? Is it not proper for us to at least make ourselves capable of whatever attack? That should be the ideal objective. And the Mutual Defense Treaty should be able to accomplish this. This is the main objective. That's why I'm asking you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, one of the aim of the DND is to continue to modernize our capability, Mr. President. That's why we have allocated 60 billion pesos in the budget to continuously support the modernization of our armed forces, Mr. President.
But that is not answering the question, Mr. President. I'm asking whether our country is in a position to repel armed attack. This is the objective of the Mutual Defense Treaty. if we continuously hide upon the argument that we are perennially being assisted by the United States, Japan, and Australia, we're compromising our sovereignty and strategic autonomy, Mr. President. So ba't meron pa po tayong mutual defense treaty? We cannot even answer the simple question.
Mr. President, with the present capability and the continuous upgrading of our military capability, the objective is to deter instances like what you have mentioned, Mr. President.
You are saying, Mr. President, we are in a position to deter, for example, China from attacking us? Can we now deter China from attacking us?
Yes, Mr. President, the Secretary answered in the affirmative.
So what are the deterrents? Or what is the deterrence, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, as we have seen in
Yung mukha nitong si Gibo, akala mo lahat kaya niya sindakin, no? Porket makakaroon niya, Amerika, kahit sa Senado, siga-sigaan datingan niya, no? Tingnan natin, angas muna sa administration lang yan.
the news that our troops are continuously training, continuously holding exercises with our allies. So with the capability of our troops and also with the partnership with our allies, Mr. President, these are the components that can bolster our deterrence, Mr. President.
That is the only answer that you can provide, Mr. President.
Mr. President, that is the objective of the Department of National Defense, Mr. President.
But, Mr. President, I'm asking in relation to the Mutual Defense Treaty. This is a very important treaty. It is, I think, 74 years old. If we maximize that treaty, hindi naman po siguro tatagal. After 74 years, hindi pa po natin masabi na kung ano ang ating napala dito sa Mutual Defense Treaty. Mas matanda pa po sa akin ang treaty ito, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, from my observation, yung interoperability, yung balikatan exercises is a clear evidence that we are operationalizing the treaty. Yung treaty ho, papel lang ho yan eh. Kung hindi ho nating ilalagay yan sa action through the balikatan exercises, through modernizing our capability, to coming up with our own modernization program, hindi ho talaga magiging beneficial yung treaty na yan. So makikita naman ho natin na tuloy-tuloy po ang paglalaan po ng pondo sa ating AFP at tuloy-tuloy rin po nila ginagawa yung kanilang makakaya with the limited budget that we have. No? Sana ho, mas malaki, but with the limited budget that we have, yung kanilang mga exercises para po makaresponde ho sila kung ano man ang pwedeng mangyari.
Sabi po nyo kanina, Mr. President, wala naman po tayong na-outsource sa ating mga partners. It is inconsistent, Mr. President. Tinatanong ko po kanina, gaano po sa ating budget ang ma-assume natin na suporta mula sa tatlong mga kaibigan natin. Ang sabi po ninyo, wala.
Yeah. May nabanggit ko ho kanina, like for example, intelligence sharing, nabanggit ko rin, nasabi ko rin ho kanina yung cybersecurity capabilities and cybersecurity capacitation. Yun po yung mga ilan sa mga ina-outsource ho natin. At partnership, hindi lang ho outsourcing, but in my view, these are partnerships. Ang mundo ho naman ay interconnected na ho ngayon at hindi ho natin pwedeng sabihin na tayo lang ang gagawa. So we have partnerships with our allies, Mr. President. But a more detailed discussion should be limited to a executive session, and the Secretary is more than willing to brief His Honor on the details of those outsourcing and partnership, Mr. President. Marami ho dito may national security concern. Pero open naman po ang ating secretary na pag-usapan yan through an executive session.
What clear red lines and conditions has the Philippines communicated to the US, Japan, or Australia regarding the use of EDCA sites, yung joint
Yan,
patrols
yan.
po natin and exercises so that our territory is not used for offensive operations unrelated to Philippine defense and security?
Di, kasi pang ano yan, pang humanitarian yan, sendante. Di mo pala alam. Pang humanitarian yan, pagka bumabagyo, yung mga AFAM naglalabasan.
Yeah. Well, under the Constitution ho, hindi ho pwede silang magtayo ng base militar ho dito. So itong mga EDCA sites ay ginagamit ho to for joint exercises as well as disaster preparedness. So ang may-ari po ng mga lupa ay tayo pa rin, ang Pilipinas pa rin. Ang nag-ooperate rin po ay tayo pa rin, ang Pilipinas pa rin. So wala ho
Magbabayad ng kuryente tubig nila, tayo pa rin.
silang responsibility sa pag-ooperate ho nun.
Given the inclusion of EDCA, Mr. President, EDCA sites near Taiwan Strait and the WPS, what risk assessment has DND made that these facilities will not become targets in a possible U.S.-China conflict, not our own making?
Based on the reply of the good secretary, their risk assessment is very low, Mr. President.
Sige po, yung ano niya, yung demeanor niya, parang yun, sige, para matapos lang to, bigyan niyo kami ng pera, babalik na kami ng Amerika, parang gano'n eh. Diba, hindi pong wala siyang pakalam, yung wala makakapigil sa amin dito, dahil bata kami ng mga Amerikano. Parang gano'n ang datingan eh, no? Ang angas-angas lang. Kung ako Senate President yan, lapitan ko yan, tapos palabasin ko yan dyan eh. Sino ka ba, ha? Bata ka lang naman ng Amerika, bakit di ka lumayas dito? Kung ako Senate President, kaso ako, hindi ako yun.
With the reciprocal access agreement with Japan, enhanced defense cooperation with Australia, what types of operations are explicitly ruled out on Philippine soil or in waters? Example, preemptive strikes, offensive cyber operations, long-range missiles deployments. If you can please specify, Mr. President.
Ako, mahirap yung mga tanong ni Sendante, ha?
Ang limitation po ay offensive operation and anything
Sige po, boss na boss ang datingan, tignan nyo. Alam niya eh, wala makakakontra sa kanya dyan eh. Oh, sino kukontra sa akin dito? Tuta ako ng Amerika. Sino? Hindi mo nga kaganyan lang. Para matapos lang.
that will
Kanya ka, Gibo ka, ha?
and anything that will pertain to engagement in war, Mr. President, as an instrument of national policy, Mr. President.
Mr. President, does the Department of National Defense agree that a decision of the Supreme Court interpreting and applying a provision of EDCA automatically becomes part of EDCA itself?
Si Brownie, nandun si Brownie, oh. Nandun si Brownie.
Mr. President, the reply of the Secretary, it's this positive portion reflects that, Mr. President.
Well, the question requires an answer either yes or no, Mr. President. What is the dispositive portion, Mr. President?
The reply of the Secretary, Mr. President, is
Yung mga nakikita yung yan, yung mga nasa sandataang lakas natin. Yan yung mga sinisweldohan ng sambayan ng Pilipino pero wala po tayong nakikitang pakialam. Wala, hindi naman sa pag-ano, ha. Ito, base lang din naman sa mga naririnig natin sa social media. Diba? Nakikita ng ating mga kababayan, okay lang ba na yung presidente, base sa kanyang kapatid, adik? Okay lang ba kaliwat kanan ng korupsyon? Diba? Okay lang sa inyo yan? Na yung mismong presidente, di umano, base doon sa mga isiniwalat ni Shaldi ko, ganun ginagawa. Anak ng tawa. Wag na, oy! Walang ya kayo, oo. Sayang.
It's part
Tapos pangungutang pa natin. Interes ba talaga ng mga Pilipino protektahan nitong mga tao na to? Eto, nagtatanong lang ha. Alam ko marami sa inyo dyan makabayan kaya nyo pinasok kay larangan na yan. Pero yung mga nasa harap nyo na naglilid sa inyo, naknagtawa, baka na-deliveran ng mga maleta yan ha. Mag-usap-usap na kayo dyan. Diba? Pinasok nyo yung larangan na yan kasi mahal nyo ang bayan. Gusto nyo maglingkod sa sambayan ng Pilipino. Naniwala ko, marami dyan yung mga nasa AFP, nasa PNP, nasa Navy, nasa Coast Guard, kung saan-saan pa. Pinasok nyo yung larangan na yan kasi mahal nyo ang sambayanan. Pero yung mga amo nyo, yung mga high-ranking official nyo, magtanong-tanong na kayo.
part of the ruling and it's part of the ratio decidendi, Mr. President.
Kawawa
Yes,
Pilipino.
of course. The decision of the Supreme Court always form part of our legal system, Mr. President. And we're referring to Ochoa, Sagisag versus Ochoa, Mr. President, where the Supreme Court interpreted Article 4 of EDCA regarding the unimpeded access of the U.S. to a military equipment, material, and supply that it has prepositioned in the Philippines. That is correct, Mr. President.
Mr. President, if that is in the ruling, then that is correct, Mr. President.
And therefore, Mr. President, you have to agree that such interpretation of the Supreme Court should automatically form part of EDCA, correct?
Yes.
And therefore, the DND has the legal mandate to implement that interpretation of the Supreme Court.
Yes, Mr. President, that's correct.
Ang sabi po kasi sa kasong ito, o decision na ito, Mr. President, it was interpreted, meaning Article 4 of EDCA, that the U.S. has unimpeded access only to those military equipment, material, and supplies that the Philippines has consented to be prepositioned on Philippine territory.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
could the DND please detail how exactly it is implementing that decision of the Supreme Court, specifically what consent mechanism it is using? Is it the Mutual Defense Board or the Security Engagement Board?
Well, Mr. President, all channels are I was informed, Mr. President, that the boards are merely recommends, and the secretaries of the DFA and the DND are the ones who approve it, Mr. President.
When we say the boards, Mr. President, we're referring to MDB and the SEB.
Yes, Mr. President, correct.
How many come from the Philippine side, Mr. President? And what is the voting requirement?
It's 7-7, Mr. President, in the board.
Has there been an instance, Mr. President, when the Philippines did not allow the U.S. to preposition a certain military equipment, material, or personnel?
Well, Mr. President, the Secretary relayed that they're not at liberty to divulge that the answer to that, Mr. President.
May we know the reason, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, because it forms part of the Mutual Defense Treaty, and it's also part of the operational security, and the President needs to approve the release of that information, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the armed forces of the Philippines mentioned that certain U.S. missiles should be prepositioned in the Philippines. Are these nuclear-capable missiles, Mr. President?
Mr. President, no, they're not nuclear missiles, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the 2006 U.S.-Bulgaria Defense Cooperation Agreement, the 2009 U.S.-Poland Status of Forces Agreement, and the 2014 U.S.-Australian Force Posture Agreement all explicitly require the United States forces to notify and obtain the exclusive consent of the host government regarding the type of defense equipment, supplies, or material to be propositioned. The U.S.-Australia agreement even provides for a snapback by the Australian Parliament. The Philippines, or the Philippine EDCA, does not have such consent provision. Why is the Department of National Defense not insisting on that insertion of such sovereign provision, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, that provision, the reply of the Secretary, the provision is not necessary because the guiding document will be the Constitution, Mr. President.
But, Mr. President, would not such sovereign provision ensure the independence of our foreign and security policies? Aside, of course, from the Constitution.
Well, Mr. President, any action in relation to the EDCA sites, the Philippine side will have the final say, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces recently said that all the investigations into and protest against the government corruption are causing destabilization and benefiting China. Do you agree that the work of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee is destabilizing the Philippine government?
Well, personally, Mr. President, that's part of our mandate under the Constitution.
Yes.
And the investigation is in aid of legislation, Mr. President.
Kaya nga po, kaya hindi tayo nagdi-destabilize kahit na po tayo ay gumagawa ng pagdinig laban sa corruption na nangyayari sa ating bansa, lalong-lalo na po itong karumal-dumal na flood control projects na nakita po natin kung ano ang...
Mr. President, well, thank you, Mr. President, for asking that question. It gives the Chief of Staff the opportunity to clarify and also to straighten the answers, Mr. President. He never said that the investigation would lead to destabilization or any instability in our political system. What he mentioned is withdrawal of the support of the AFP will lead to destabilization. So, and that's very clear, Mr. President, the difference between the responsibilities of the legislature in aid of legislation and also the withdrawal of the support of the military, Mr. President.
Do you agree in the Philippines' one China policy? Do you agree with Japan that any forcible unification of China and Taiwan is a threat to Philippine security?
Well, Mr. President, the policy is we adhere to the one China policy. But of course, the actions succeeding to that will be subject for discussion, Mr. President.
And you do not agree with Japan.
Mr. President, for now that is hypothetical, and it's so there. Yeah, correct. It's hypothetical, and that is the statement of Japan, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Vietnam's policy of no military alliance has enabled it to develop an indigenous capability to produce military drones. Do you think the Philippines should forever rely on external military assistance or try to stand on our own?
Well, that's the direction, Mr. President, to be self-reliant on our military needs, Mr. President, and hopefully later on we can invite investors to come here and build facilities that will manufacture drones and other military equipment, Mr. President. That's the aspiration, Mr. President.
But only if conditions will provide in order for this opportunity to come in the near future.
Mr. President, the proposal of the Department of National Defense is to amend the Self-Reliant Defense Posture Law. That will allow equity investments, Mr. President, in the Philippines, so that we can attract defense manufacturers to come here to the Philippines. Like, for example, Korea is a big defense exporter, and we can invite them to set up shop here, Mr. President. That is the direction.
What lessons from the Russian-Ukraine war have our experts in the DND derived in relation to the need for indigenous military capability?
Well, Mr. President, there are many lessons that the department derived from that Russian-Ukraine war. One is the indigenous capability in manufacturing, Mr. President, and actually I've seen some documentaries that because of that war, the Ukraine defense manufacturing industry had a resurgence. They now produce virtually most of the things that they need to repel the Russian invasion. Number two is another lesson is you cannot rely on one country in terms of one country alone to on both sides, Mr. President, on defense support, Mr. President. So it's important to also have alliances with different like-minded nations, Mr. President.
So what steps does the DND take, Mr. President, to build our indigenous military capability? And if so, which part of the budget that we now consider will be devoted to ensuring such indigenous capability?
Well, Mr. President, the aspiration is to produce our own technology, defense technology, Mr. President. But the department strongly recommends the amendment of the Self-Reliance Defense Posture Law so that government can so the government can invest in research and development, as well as the government can invest in defense manufacturing investments, Mr. President. So because of that law, there are limitations in terms of what government can do in defense manufacturing, Mr. President.
I'd like to hear a better word, Mr. President, than aspiration. Parang aspiration, malayong-malayo pang mararating na. Can we use another term para kahit paano
The
Hindi
vision.
yung lilipad-lipad na...
The vision. The actualization, Mr. President. Yun naman talaga ho ang gusto ho natin because it also creates jobs and technology transfer. But it's, as you know, no, the defense is also very complicated and the technology is not readily available.
Yes, Mr. President, talagang yun ang aking gustong tunguhan kasi. Can you imagine the Mutual Defense Treaty is 74 years old? Kahit papaano nating kwentahin ito, Mr. President, talagang wala. Pasensya na kayo kung exasperated ako pero
Yun.
Pero Mr. President, if you've seen the last 3 years, yung mga balikatan exercises had ramped up tremendously, Mr. President. And that's clear evidence that the Mutual Defense Treaty is doing its responsibility, Mr. President.
yes,
Goal.
but they fell short in being able to satisfy our requirement that our country is now in a clear position of being able to repel armed attack. Ayoko nang bumalik doon. Yung kasilangan punto ron Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, last comment, actually under the leadership of Secretary Teodoro, doon po talaga nag-umpisa itong ramping up ng mga alliances with our like-minded partners, Mr. President. And with that, doon rin nag-umpisa yung investments rin ho natin sa modernization. Kaya this year, Mr. President, pinakamalaking modernization fund ang ilalagay po ng Senado para po makahabol ho tayo sa mga pangangailangan ho natin.
Yun po yung gusto ko sabihin, Mr. President. Nakabawi-bawi tayo ng konti dahil nandyan ang aking kaibigan, Secretary Gibo. Kung wala pa siya dyan, paano na? Kasi hindi natin masasabi kung mananatili siya dyan. Pwede siyang...
Yung palang punto nyo, Mr. President. Nakuha ko na ho.
Kaya nga Would you say that militarization rather than diplomacy is the main mode of dispute settlement of China?
No, Mr. President, absolutely not, Mr. President.
Okay. So, ang main tool po natin is diplomacy insofar as the Philippines is concerned.
Yes, Mr. President. But it's at the same time, Mr. President, it's to our best and core interest to continuously modernizing our capability, Mr. President.
Yung po mga diplomatic efforts natin, ano-ano po yun? Sana hindi lang po mga diplomatic protest tsaka yung tinatawag nilang megaphone diplomacy. Are there actual negotiations and are there budgets devoted for these actual negotiations para yung diplomacy makita natin po talagang nag-ooperate?
Mr. President, under the budgets of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Mr. President, merong mga amounts there to continuously engage our partners as well as other countries in diplomacy, Mr. President.
Mr. President, is it correct to say that the Department of National Defense is asking the people for billions of pesos to defend the West Philippine Sea, or WPS?
Well, Mr. President, it's not only limited to the West Philippine Sea, Mr. President. It's the
Yeah, in relation only to the West Philippine Sea.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. Pwede, paano natin isang map? Can we ask the staff to please show the first map? Mr. President, hindi ba lalaki ng konti? Palakin mo. Mr. President, I'm trying to show the official map of the South China Sea as published by the International Hydrographic Organization in S-23 or Limits of Oceans and Seas. We are not supposed to defend the entire South China Sea, Mr. President.
No, Mr. President, only
Only-
our exclusive, until our
Only the
exclusive-
portion of the
Yeah,
West Philippine Sea.
Yes, Mr. President, until the exclusive economic zone, and also in the other side, Mr. President.
Hindi, doon muna
Eastern
tayo
side
sa
seaboard,
West,
Mr.
sa
President.
West Philippine Sea muna tayo. Isa-isa lang, boss. Mahirap ang kalabanan. Can you tell me, Mr. President, exactly which portion is the West Philippine Sea? Can you show us a map indicating the features and the limits of that area where we will be spending some of the budgets of the DND for consideration?
Mr. President, it's 200 nautical miles from our baseline, Mr. President. Those are the areas that the DND intends to bolster, Mr. President.
If you are saying 200 nautical miles from the archipelagic baseline, you're referring to the exclusive economic zone.
Correct, Mr. President.
The reason I'm raising this question, Mr. President, is that the lack of precise identification of the area where the people's money is supposed to be spent, parang ang mangyayari po parang yung flood control ngayon. Dahil po sa discrepancy in coordinates, ang damit billion po kasi ang natapon din na pera. If the DND says that the WPS is the EEZ, meron pong mas magandang definition yun. Sa Administrative Order Number 29 and Republic Act 12064 or the Maritime Zones Law, sinasabi po ron the WPS is Philippines maritime areas on the western side of the archipelago, including the Luzon Sea, as well as the waters around, within and adjacent to the Calayan Island Group and Bajo de Masinloc, also known as Scarborough Shoal. Tama po yun, ano, Sir President?
Yes, correct, Mr. President.
Would you agree that under Administrative Number 29, the term Calayan Island Group refers to the area enclosed by boundaries identified under Section 1 of Presidential Decree Number 1596?
Tama po, Mr.
Yes.
President. Tama po kayo.
And you will also agree that under paragraph 574 of arbitral award in the South China Sea arbitration, the tribunal declared that the Philippines cannot apply boundaries to enclose the Spratly Islands or a portion thereof. Yes.
Yes, we agree. We agree with the arbitral award, Mr. President.
Ito po yung section po ng 1596, Mr. President, and paragraph 574 ng arbitral award. Magkalaban po talaga Sabi po ng arbitral award, Mr. President, and I quote, "In any event, however, even the Philippines could not declare archipelagic baselines surrounding the Spratly Islands. Article 47 of the Convention limits the use of archipelagic baselines to circumstances where within such baseline are included the main islands and an area in which the ratio of the area of the water to the area of the land, including atolls, is between 1:1 and 9:1. Question, is it obvious now that PD 1596 and paragraph 574 of the arbitral award, Mr. President, are incompatible? And therefore, you will agree that definition of the WPS in Administrative Order 29 had to be changed to make it compatible with the arbitral award, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, the Secretary replied that no, it's not incompatible because portions of the EEZ is also included in that, Mr. President.
We will go to that, Mr. President, but if you will care to consider yung Section 1 po ng Presidential Decree 1596 and the arbitral award, they are inconsistent and incompatible. Kasi po dito sa Article 2, Paragraph B ng Republic Act 12064, niredefine niya yung WPS. Ang definition na po rito ngayon ng naging batas na ito ay the maritime zones of the Philippines on the western side of the Philippines, on the Philippine archipelago, including the Luzon Sea and the territorial seas of Bao de Masinloc and the maritime features of the Calayan Island Group. Ngayon po, Mr. President, yung limits po ng West Philippine Sea, ang sabi po natin kanina is the 200 nautical limit of the EEZ. Are you saying that Kalayaan and other features are not part of the WPS, Mr. President?
Mr. President, the prevailing law is RA 9522. That is the one that they are following, Mr. President.
RA
9522. Republic Act 9522. Enacted in 2009, Mr. President.
Paano po yung Republic Act number 12064? 2012 po ito. This is the more recent law.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. President, maritime zones and the baselines are different matters, Mr. President.
Alam ko po yun, Mr. President. Pero kung pag-uusapan po natin na yung limit po ng West Philippine Sea ay yung ating exclusive economic zone, which is 200 nautical miles from our baseline, malinaw po na ang Kalayaan Island Group ay hindi po kasali sapagkat it is beyond the West Philippine Sea. Pwede po natin ipakita yung pangalawang mapa.
Well, Mr. President, what we are following insofar as the Kalayaan Group of Islands is RA 9522, which defines the baseline, Mr. President, of the country.
Yun nga po, Mr. President, sa baseline natin, kahit sa 9522, wala po doon yung Kalayaan Island Group.
Mr. President, nandoon po yung KIG, Mr. President, Kalayaan Island Group.
Ipakita natin yung yung isa pa pong ayan po, kayo na pong humanap kung nasaan yung KIG. Wala po eh.
Ito po, Mr. Section 2, Section 2A, the Kalayaan Island Group as constituted under Presidential Decree 1596. And letter B, Bajo de Mansinloc, also known as Scarborough Shoal, Mr. President. Nandito ho siya sa 952.
Kasi po, Mr. President, sa Republic Act 12064 or the Maritime Zones Law, ito po yung ginagamit ninyo ngayon eh. Inalis po niya yung boundaries ng 1596 na in-enclose ang KIG. Tingnan po ninyo. Section 5 in relation to Section 18, yung term Kalayaan Island Group now refers only to certain high tide elevations and the respective territorial sea. Inalis po talaga eh.
Yeah. Well, Mr. President, when it comes to the Kalayaan Island Group, Mr. President, it's RA 9522.
Hindi po. Ang ating pong recent batas na po, yung RA 12064, it was enacted last year, November 7, 2024. So hindi po pwedeng manaig po yung sinasabi nyo dahil ito na po yung more recent na batas na ginawa po natin. So as it stands now, Mr. President, yung ating West Philippine Sea includes the maritime features of the KIG. Palagay natin. And that some of these features are separated by high seas. Kung mangyayari po yun, Mr. President, ang mangyayari talaga, ang WPS is a discontinuous and disjointed body of water.
But Mr. President, also in Section 3 defines the baselines, Mr. President. And it referred back to RA 9522, Mr. President. So, dinefine dito sa batas na ito, yung baseline ng ating bansa at prefer niya bumalik ho tayo sa 9522. So, hindi ho siya inconsistent, Mr. President. The maritime zones only define the maritime zones, kung saan po pwedeng dumaan yung barko, Mr. President. But in terms of the baseline, it refers back to 9522, which includes the Kalayaan Island Group, Mr. President.
Hindi nga po yung batas po na binabanggit natin na atin pong ipinasa last year, inalis niya na po yung KIG. Wala na po roon eh.
With all due respect, Mr. President, nandito ho kami nung we were discussing this law, and with all due respect, hindi ho ganun yung nangyari, Mr. President.
Kaya nga po, kung sakaling sabihin natin na ang WPS now will include the maritime features of the KIG, exactly how many features are we talking about here? Can you name and locate each of these features? Can you see us or can you show us the official map?
9 major islands, Mr. President. That is the, there are 9 major islands, Mr. President.
Doon po sa KIG?
Hindi lang po sa KIG, but yung mga features po sa...
Yun nga
West
po,
Philippine
ang pinakamahirap dito po, dahil wala pa po tayong official map ng West Philippine Sea, hindi po natin madidescribe lahat ang features. At kung meron pong isang mang Pilipino ang maaring mabuhay doon. I'm asking these questions, Mr. President, to make certain that we know what we are talking about when we say West Philippine Sea. Nung po kasing ito'y unang nabanggit nung nasa mababang kapulungan ako, dahil nga po sa hindi pagkakaintindi sa isyong ito, nung sinabi ko na ang West Philippine Sea tayo lang ito. But in the context of international law, hindi po talaga alam pa. Ang alam po nila ay yung South China Sea. Can you imagine, Mr. President, the discomfort, for example, of a passenger in a plane about his safety or her safety, kung marinig niya yung pilot at saka yung control tower, nagdidebate sila kung nasan siya lugar. Sabi ng pilot, I am here in the West Philippine Sea. Hindi maintindihan ngayon nung control tower. Ganun po kasi, after more than 16 years, or maybe 12 years, since 2012, nung ipasa po natin yung RA 12064, the Philippines has not applied with International Hydrographic Organization for the adoption of the name West Philippine Sea. Yun po kasi yung naging problema yata natin, Mr. President. Bakit po kaya?
Well, Mr. President, I think that question will be best referred to the Department of Foreign Affairs, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, in proper time we will do that. But I guess considering that the West Philippine Sea is one of those areas that even our national defense officials are protecting or try to protect, kailangan po alam natin kung ano yung ating gustong proteksyonan. Ang sabi pa nga po ng ibang mga advocates, WPS, atin to. Mga ganun na, di ba? China, umalis ka sa WPS. Even our president said in his statements, West Philippine Sea is worth dying for. We'd like to see and would like to know, Mr. President, when we send our children and grandchildren to war, protecting the West Philippine Sea, alam natin kung nasan talaga. What are the exact coordinates? Ngayon po talagang ang labo talaga eh. Parang sinabi mo, yung Pasig River, some portion of Taguig, some portion of Pasig, and some portions of another municipality. Hindi mo alam kung saan nagsimula, kung saan napuputol. Maybe we can ask the Executive Department to be precise in its identification of the features and limits of the West Philippine Sea. Kasi po, para yung mga ghost missions or even ghost budgets, kasi nangyari nga po sa flood control, they were all using several applications. Hindi sila, magkakaiba po eh. Sabi pa nila, geotag, real time. Pero ang punting nan, talagang wala yung mga flood control projects. So dito po, ganun din. Kailangan matukoy natin. Speaking of maritime features, Mr. President, let me refer back to the map identifying its features. Ito pong, yung balik mo nga dun sa pangalawang mapa. Ayan. You will agree, Mr. President, that based on that map, Vietnam occupies 21 features, China 9, and the Philippines 9.
The Philippines 11, Mr.
O
President.
11 siguro. So 21 features for China, for Vietnam, 9 for China, Philippines 11.
Mr. President.
What is the policy of the national defense regarding Vietnam?
Well, Mr. President, in the case of Vietnam, Vietnam is not actively trying to add more areas to their territory, Mr. President. Unlike China, Mr. President.
21 na kasi ang nakuha niya eh.
So that's why in the case of Vietnam, meron ho tayong mga trust building activities and diplomatic activities with
So
with
pare-pareho
Vietnam.
tayong claimants dito, Mr. President. Are we going to force Vietnam out of these features?
Ano? Oh.
With Vietnam, Mr. President, we have open communication lines with them, and these communication lines will also discuss this type of issues, Mr. President.
What about with China, Mr. President?
Well, with China, it's a different case because we all know that China is trying to claim our territories even within the inclusive economic zone, Mr. President. Nevertheless, diplomatic approaches is still the approach that we are endeavoring towards China, Mr.
Pero
President.
sabi natin kanina, Mr. President, yung open and actual negotiations ay ating ginagawa, and I even asked kung magkano ang budget natin dito sa actual negotiation, hindi lang naman megaphone.
The budgets are in the DFA, Mr. President, and the amounts are not significant because this is part of their diplomatic activities, Mr. President.
Hindi natin sila mapapaalis at hindi naman yun ang policy natin, Mr. President. So if that is the case, ang Vietnam ba, ang China, ay paalisin tayo sa mga inoccupy nating features?
Sa Vietnam, wala po. Wala pong ganun. In fact, we have good relations with Vietnam. Maraming nga hong Pinoy na teachers nagtuturo po sa Vietnam. With China, is a different case, as you know, Mr. President.
Sa China is a different case. So, maaari tayong puwersahing umalis, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we still the approach of our policymakers is to continue to engage, to continue to open the diplomatic channels with China and with other countries, Mr. President. And for me, that is the best approach, Mr. President.
But forcing us out from these occupied territories is a potential threat, Mr. President.
It's a potential threat, Mr. President.
If that is so, Mr. President, has the Philippines filed a protest with the United Nations Security Council as required under Article 2 of the United Nations Charter?
Well, Mr. President, to answer your question directly, no. But to give the reasons on why that policy was undertaken, the best department to answer that is the Department of Foreign Affairs, Mr. President.
Kasi po kung ang sagot natin is no, Mr. President, then the threat is more imagined than real.
Well, Mr. President, China is has veto powers in the National Security Council, Mr. President. So yeah, that's why we have to strategize very carefully, Mr. President.
Kanina po, Mr. President, sa aking pagtatanong, I was trying to differentiate po kasi dahil nga sa sigalot sa West Philippine Sea, ang dami pong misunderstanding dyan, ang daming misconception. Kaya po kung minsan ay hindi nagkakasundo ang iba't ibang mga mamamayan natin. For example po, yung tinatawag nating West Philippine Sea na hanggang ngayon hindi natin talaga malagyan ng exact coordinates, ano-anong mga features niyan, ano-anong mga forma niyan para sa ganun kung tayo makikipag-away talaga at makikipagdigma, alam mo naman po natin ang ating pinakikipaglaban.
Ayun na nga mga kababayan, kung gusto nyo panoorin ang kabuuan ng video na yan, punta lang ho kayo sa Senate, YT channel. As always, maraming salamat po sa pag-support sa ph.update. Mag-ingat po kayo lahat. Mahal natin Pilipinas.